So hi all, and welcome again to Happy Hour JLM, the future of education. My name's Rachel, and I'm the COO of Nex.D, which is, for some of you that don't know us, we're the nonprofit that specifically builds the Jerusalem startup and tech ecosystem. We'd like to thank our yearly sponsor and partner for this evening, Arc Impact. Thank you so much, Nicky, Racer, and Rachel, and we'll hear from you soon, Nicky. And we'd also like to thank our Happy Hour JLM sponsors for 2020, Yigal El-Non, DLA Piper, Jump Speed Ventures, AWS, WeWork, Jerusalem Foundation, VIA, Urban Place, Microsoft for Startups, Bagel Studio, Present Tense, Cross River, Brick Software, Deloitte, Arc Impact, the Jerusalem Municipality, the Jerusalem Development Authority, and Nex.D. Thank you. So tonight's obviously a very exciting night for us because we also have 3 international guest speakers from London, New York, I believe, John, am I right? Yeah. Yeah?
Yep.
Okay, cool. New York, NY, and Boston, so welcome. And we're going to be focusing tonight on the future of education, which is obviously something that we're talking about a lot right now with the situation, with an emphasis on universities. And we're going to be hearing from Chris Dellarocas, Michal, Tsur, and John Katzman. And after their speeches, we'll have a Q&A session with Colin Brown. So let's get started. I'm delighted to introduce our sponsor and partner for the evening and for the year, Nicky Newfield, the founding partner of Arc Impact, which is the Jerusalem-based impact investment fund. Thank you so much, Nicky.
Sure, and thank you from Made in Jerusalem for really always being a brilliant partner and for building the ecosystem, really doing an amazing job. And I think that tonight's session is very important. I think thumbs up to anyone on this call who's educating anyone in their house, like other than yourself, right? Like anyone who's educating kids or elderly, or right? Hands up to anyone who's actually educating yourself in any given way. Have you taken a course? Have you attended more Zooms? Right? And I think that really what we're here to speak about is that the word education is flipped. It's no longer anyone giving information, everyone's acquiring information. The future of education, we need experts who have got their finger on the pulse, which is our incredible speakers who've given their time tonight to join us. Thank you. So we need to know what that future is, because if we're talking about innovation, and we're trying to build innovative solutions to really fit the future, we need to know what the future holds for us. And I think that really successful solutions are helping us navigate fluently between an in-person meeting, process, building, and our virtual world. And that all that's happened with COVID has highlighted the cracks that already exist and just made them so much bigger. And it's given us an opportunity to open the field of education to change. And perhaps it's really created a moment in time that there is a catalytic action that change that would have taken time over, we don't know, 5 years, really accelerated into 3 months. And I think really more investors, more companies, more people are really thinking about how to build for this future. And we've seen companies accelerate huge. We've seen new players. We've seen players that existed in different spheres being interested in education. But what's biggest is that it's moved every individual in the world. If you were not interested in education, you became either an educator or a student over this time. So there's no one that's been unaffected by this change. So without further ado, we ask Rachel to introduce our first speaker. And thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you so much, Nicky. This was all Nicky's idea, or Nicky's connection. So thank you so much, Nicky. And Nicky, this is so important to Nicky, and she's really helping it in Jerusalem and in Israel thrive, the ed tech ecosystem. So really thank you, Nicky, for all your contribution. Okay, so we're going to introduce our first speaker. Who's not on mute? Okay, so we're going to introduce our first speaker, Chris Dellarocas. Little intro. Chris is one of the world's most cited scholars in the fields of online reputation and social media, and has consulted on these subjects for corporations and the US federal government. Chris leads the advancements of activities that enhance education at Boston University through the strategic use of digital technologies. Central to these efforts are a series of critical collaborations across Boston University's 17 schools and colleges that ensure the alignment of digital strategies and the introduction of new technologies that further the university's progress as a 21st century global research institution. Just a bit about how intelligent he is. He holds a PhD and MS degrees in computer science from MIT, the Massachusetts Institution of Technology, and a diploma in electrical engineering from the National Technical University of Athens in Greece. Prior to his appointment at Boston University in 2009, he taught at MIT's Sloan School of Management and at the R.H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. Oh my God, I can't say that, sorry. Maryland, I always say it wrong. Prior to his academic career, Chris was a management consultant with Anderson Consulting, now Accenture and McKinsey. So Chris is an incredible guy, and we are so happy we have you, and you were so willing to help. So thank you so much, Chris. Chris is going to be speaking about Education 2030, 5 trends for the future. So Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. My head is spinning from the bio you just read. So thank you for inviting me to this exciting event.
It's your life, Chris. It's your life.
I'm excited to be presenting alongside such distinguished speakers. So Rachel asked me to sum up my thoughts about the future of education in 8 minutes. And as you know, the most difficult thing for an academic is not to start talking, is to stop talking. So for me, it was a Herculean task to sum up my thoughts into 5 longer term trends and roughly, I don't know, 1,000 words or something like that. So let me share one slide that I made with you, for you. Yeah, can you all see the slide? Good. So 5 trends, all right? So here goes. Number 1. So the role of education has traditionally been to prepare a person for success in the world. However, the world is changing more and more rapidly, and most learned skills and competencies are becoming obsolete within a few years, and they need replenishment with new skills and new competencies. So in my mind, we need to reframe the mission of education as helping a person stay fit for success in an ever-changing world. This makes education a continuous service, like going to the gym, or perhaps more appropriately, like visiting your doctor and your dentist. In the same way that you go to the doctor or your dentist every 6 months for a medical checkup and you receive treatment if something's wrong with you, people will increasingly need to be monitoring their education fitness, the extent to which the skills and competencies are up to the circumstances of the changing world, and engage in periodic and continuous educational treatment that keeps them fit to keep pursuing their life's goals. So this reframing of education as a lifelong service will have fundamental consequences for the entire structure of this industry. Number 2, one of the things that COVID has exposed is the fact that education is a rich bundle of services, of which the transmission of knowledge via courses is just one. Students who were abruptly forced to remote course delivery found that they missed all the other pieces of the bundle: the mentoring, the community, the experientials, collectively referred to as the campus experience. Many students asked for money back because they didn't feel that courses alone justified the tuition cost. So in a world where education is moving to digital delivery, I believe that educational content will be the first component of the bundle to become a commodity. 95% of the content we teach is identical to that of the next institution down the road. In the near future, I believe that consolidation of educational content will be inevitable. Differentiation and competition among institutions will increasingly rest on the mentoring, community, and experiential components of the service offering. That is, on the relationship part of the education equation. These are the areas where institutions should be paying increasing attention in years to come. Number 3, cost is one of the major pain points of education today. The current educational process that relies on teams of faculty and teaching assistants is too expensive and does not scale. Education is perhaps the only major industry section that has not realized massive economies of scale because of technology. Economies of scale in the digital economy generally come from two sources: algorithms and communities. Algorithms such as personalized machine learning and AI hold substantial promise in helping personalize and automate aspects of the educational process. But the area that I believe holds equal promise and has not been given its due attention is communities. Communities have worked tremendously well on the internet. Witness the success of large-scale knowledge exchange sites like Quora or Stack Overflow. Humans learn from each other as much as we learn from books and teachers. In the next few years, we will figure out ways to leverage peer-to-peer learning even more and integrate it at the heart of scalable, affordable, effective educational processes that will be both more personal, but also more social. Number 4, the role of faculty today reminds me of physicians in the 19th century, sole artisans who were responsible for the entire process of providing healthcare to their constituents, often improvising in areas where they had poor knowledge. Healthcare today is very different. When we visit a hospital, we typically interact with a variety of specialized technicians, nurses, and the doctor is only one of the many people we meet. In the near future, faculty will become just one member of a multi-role team. Faculty bring domain knowledge. However, an effective education process involves instructional design, experience design, algorithm design, media production, as well as a lot of mentoring, coaching, and community moderation. Specialized roles are already emerging in each of these areas, and their importance and status are going to increase in the future. And finally, number 5, and perhaps the most important point I want you to remember from my remarks today. So over my career, I have witnessed many pundits like myself predict radical change in education. Only this change never seems to happen so quickly or as radically than they predict. I have been asking myself, why is that? And I think I have come up with an answer. Change in education will remain slow unless we overcome one fundamental hurdle that has prevented large-scale transformation: the ability to reliably measure and assess the outcome of education in the area that really matters, that is, the aptitude of a person to succeed in life. Education is what economists call a credence good. That is a good whose true quality cannot be reliably assessed by consumers even after consumption. Colleges give grades and grant degrees, but we all know that this provides a very coarse and unreliable measure of what a person is truly capable of. Most of us do not fully realize the true value of our own education until much later in our lives. The inability to measure the outcomes of education in a meaningful way has led to an industry that is heavily brand dominated, hierarchical, and resistant to change. Innovation in education will explode once we develop reliable, data-driven methods that can assess the value of a given innovation, improving a person's ability to be successful in the world. If I was a government wanting to see long-term in education, or a startup looking for a big splash, this is the first area that I would be making investments in. Transforming education from a credence good to a measurable is the key that will unlock everything else. So these are my 5 trends, delivered, I believe, roughly on time. I would be glad to elaborate on any of these during the Q&A part of the session. So thank you again for inviting me, and I look forward to the rest of the event.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was great. And I'm sure Colin's going to have questions for you later. Right, Colin?
Of course. I've got questions now. I'm just going to have to hold my tongue.
Yeah, okay. We do have, 60 seconds? We do have 60 seconds. You spoke less than your time, Chris, after all that.
Well done.
Well done.
Thank you.
Okay, so I guess we'll go on, and now we'll have more time for questions. So you have your questions ready, Colin, for the end. Okay, awesome. So next speaker is Michal. So Michal Tsur is the co-founder, president, and general manager of Kaltura. Michal leads Kaltura's enterprise and learning business unit after having led Kaltura's product, marketing, and community globally since its inception. Prior to Kaltura, Michal co-founded Kyoto, I think pronounce it, a world-leading provider of security and anti-fraud solutions to financial institutions. Michal has been part of Kyoto's management team from its inception up until its acquisition by RSA Security in 2005. Michal holds a doctoral degree in the application of game theoretic models to law from New York University and was a postdoctoral fellow at Yale Law School's Information Society Project, where her research focused on open source. Michal clerked at the Supreme Court of Israel and has also been a competitive swimmer and triathlete. Michal regularly blogs and writes for the Huffington Post and other applications. Michal, you have done everything. All these speakers have done everything. You are incredible people. So Michal, would you like to take it from here?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. So first of all, I was actually made in Jerusalem. So I'm actually made in JLM. So I grew up in Jerusalem. I went to high school in Jerusalem. I got my bachelor's degree in Hebrew University, and I was in a swim team and a running club in Jerusalem. So all in all, I'd say that Jerusalem has played a very important role in my education and actually informing my social and business networks. So I've been a tech entrepreneur for the past 20 years, and in the past 13 years, I was at Kaltura, which for those of you who don't know Kaltura, we're a cloud video technology platform that we set the mission of powering any video experience for any organization. And one of the key areas that we've focused on pretty much since 2008 at Kaltura has been the use of video technology for learning and for education more broadly, which has greatly evolved over time at Kaltura and in general in the market. So, we service many hundreds of educational institutions, most of the Ivy Leagues, about 70% of the top research universities, and many ed tech and learning tech platforms. In fact, two of John's companies, 2U and Noodle partners, is our Kaltura customers. And interestingly enough, also Boston University is using Kaltura. So it was actually exciting to be on this meetup, this virtual meetup with you. So the basics that are needed for video to work are a camera and a screen. But when we started Kaltura at the end of 2006, actually, most of us did not have a camera and a screen in our pocket. Most of the laptops, like the conversation we're having right now, did not have an integrated webcam. So this reality that we've been forced into in the past months would not have been available had it happened in 2006. Still in those days, and when Kaltura was looking at where video will become popular and where it will become mission critical, we decided that it would become mission critical in learning and education. And over time, we invested a lot in developing capabilities that will adapt general purpose video to support learning. So it's things like making the video technology itself accessible, making the video content engaging, making content interactive, connecting to the ecosystem, so connecting to tools such as Chen here mentioned, allowing to annotate, to collaborate, adding quizzing, assessment, personalizing it, making it adaptive, making it searchable. And we just recently acquired another company whose technology was based out of Israel called Neuro, who started out as one of our partners in the ecosystem with a virtual classroom product. And now their technology is serving as the foundation for our virtual classroom offering and more broadly for video conferencing and meeting capabilities. But I'd say that the most important investment that we made as part of our entry into education was making video and making our technology a native part and integrated into systems that educational institutions already use. So making it easy for tech platforms such as 2U and Noodle to integrate technology and create their own experiences. Because ultimately, we're not an ed tech company, and we do not necessarily have the very broad vision that is focused on education, but our vision is that video should be a critical and important component in education and learning. So, there's a lot being said and written about the future of education, and probably much more than what we're going to say in these few minutes here. looking at it from many angles over the years. What will the role of education institutions be, and how education should change and adapt to the economy and to the market. And probably most interesting for me is how technology can actually support and help shape the future of education. Now, this topic represents the topic of, the future of education being now. It represents the recent reality, the disruption. I think Nicky mentioned it at the beginning, that's happened in education and the use of technology, and particularly, by the way, the use of video technology during COVID-19. This period has accelerated the technology adoption at a global scale. It's highlighted, by the way, many areas related to access to education. And I think, a lot of these things have been stagnant for a long time. It's forcing many institutions to now think and consider their operations. So it's not just, oh, okay, we rushed and we adopted all of this technology now, but, a lot of organizations are now sitting down and thinking seriously, what do we need to do? What is the right investment? What is the future for our operation? It's not only our technology, it's how do we want to operate in the future? And I'd say that one of the things that has come to mind to me recently is that education technology has primarily been focused on the learning aspect of education. But in fact, education is much broader than learning. COVID-19 has caused so many shifts in learning practices on a massive global scale, and because it's impacted global aspects, to formal education programs, and it's impacted physical access and accelerated this adoption, it's made the current timing to be the best to consider what future do we want for education and how we could integrate and use technology more smartly for education. So what are the technologies that will be critical as these shifts happen? The important point, I think, for these conversations and all of these decisions is that it's much more of a clean slate than before. And I think in the past, a lot of the conversations and decisions were constrained by, I guess, fear of adoption and fear of technology by many participants in the education system. So when you consider education as it has been for many years, so it's responsible for research, it's responsible for knowledge and skills, for providing official certificates and degrees, and maybe again, I'm over highlighting it, but at the heart of most of the education systems, when you think of the time we spend in the education, I guess, institutions, not only, by the way, higher ed, also K through 12, education extends way beyond the learning and the research, and it's creating communities, it's creating networks, it's social networks that later on become business networks. These are the people that we spend so many hours and days inside and outside the classroom. You go jogging, I used to go swimming, you drink coffee together. This is, I think, one of the most important foundations for a lot of our peer networks. So as many of the institutions are shifting to remote education and rely on technology, including, to a very great extent, our own Kaltura video technology, it's become, apparent that the main focus has been, to address the continuity of learning. So as COVID-19 and the outbreak of COVID-19, everybody was thinking, how do we do not disrupt learning? And how do we make sure that everybody can continue accessing learning and knowledge and get their degrees? And this is definitely very important, and it was the most urgent task to attend to with this outbreak. But as we're thinking of what is the best mix of, offline and online education, and not only learning, and what's the optimal mix of technologies, and as institutions seem more than ever ripe to consider hybrid and online models, I think it's critical to consider how we address all of the aspects of education and not only learning. So it's also a great opportunity to think about access to education at a global scale. As we think of it, think of education in a broader sense. So if we're thinking of education as networks and social networks and communities, there's actually a very big global opportunity to forge these global networks and connections. So with all of this in mind, at Kaltura, we're looking at how technology, and in particular, our video technology can now better shape education. So there are many aspects that we look at as we're thinking, okay, so what is the future of education when it actually now is very focused on video? So obviously, online learning and video will continue to grow, and there are many opportunities there, and our prime focus is on how do you actually mesh the virtual and the on-demand at your own time, at your own pace. How do you actually allow to leverage very high value content in sessions? So a lot of these systems don't allow you to play back video as part of the session. If I wanted to share a video now, it would be totally choppy. So part of the investment we've made is to make sure that you can actually share videos as part of these online sessions at a high quality and a great experience, and collaborate on them. And why is that important? Because actually we can now leverage the fact that there are some teachers that are better, and maybe a lot of us should learn from those teachers. But on the other hand, obviously you don't want the variation. Variation is good because you don't want everybody learning everything at the same rate. So you need to have a mix of all of these things. I can tell you that in Israel, there was an experiment to run 12 live channels for K through 12 students, assuming, that worst case that happens, if the systems don't work, everybody will sit down with their televisions and watch these live channels with the different class content. And, like in the old days when you had, some academic content for everybody watching the same piece of content. Now, as a foundation, it's actually an interesting idea to integrate that into online learning. And part of the thought is, okay, how can you actually allow a mix of central content like the textbooks, but have the text videos and have that shared interestingly. We're also looking to, to create new styles of learning. One of the things that you can't do in physical environments is you actually can't create very, very small learning groups within the class, because typically the physical environment is very constraining. Operationally, it's difficult. Actually, online allows you to create these very small study groups as part of a classroom. So how do you actually address that in a very simple way to allow these types of experiences that you cannot have them offline, but actually become very relevant online? And as we're looking at, the social aspect of education, I'd say that first of all, the smaller groups actually create new types of social interactions. I think that is super interesting. And the second is the entire experience of choosing your institution, going to see it, having a tour of the institution. I mean, this is a very important part of, seeing who are the peers that are visiting that institution. So these are things that also, as you're thinking of education and the institution and which institution do I want to be part of, these are also things that are going to be very much aided by video as part of the broader education experience. So, as we're thinking of these shifts and we're considering how, the new setting is a great springboard to rethinking education practices, and, we're looking at what are the types of technologies that should be developed, and how can we address not only the narrow aspect of learning, but actually, education much more broadly.
Thank you so much, Michal. I'm really sorry, but we're running out of time, so we need to move to the next speaker. But you will have time at the end, obviously, for the questions with Colin.
No, I'm actually done, so.
I mean, I thought you were done, but thank you so much. Awesome, that was super interesting. So we're now going to move on to our third and final speaker before we go to the question and answer with all these EdTech experts. So I'd like to introduce another international speaker all the way from New York City, John Katzman, chairman and founder at Noodle and CEO at Noodle Partners. John Katzman is an American entrepreneur and education evangelist. He founded the Noodle companies in 2012 with the mission of increasing transparency and efficiency across the education landscape. For 38 years, John has been a pioneer of innovation in the American educational system. In 1981, he founded and ran the Princeton Review, which helped half of the students applying to US colleges and universities each year find, get into, and pay for school. That is so cool, John. reminding myself. That is very cool. In 2008, John founded 2U, an educational tech company that builds and runs high quality online degree programs for leading nonprofit colleges and universities. Under his lead, 2U was named among the 10 startups changing the world by Forbes and is now a $4 billion firm. John serves on several boards of directors, including Renaissance Learning, the Woodrow Wilson Foundation, and the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. He has authored many articles and 5 books. John is going to speak about collaboration at scale, the networked university. So without further ado, John Katzman.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. I'm going to use PowerPoint here, so let's see how that works. Can you see the deck?
Yep.
Can everyone see? Yeah,
Good.
okay, cool. Awesome.
All right, just prepared a couple comments for you guys on where the world might be going, and it's consistent with what you've heard today in many ways. The 800-pound gorilla, as Chris mentioned, for higher ed is its cost. The perceived cost, because sometimes US schools, for instance, charge a great deal of money and then discount back half. But the actual cost of higher ed is probably the greatest impediment to the kind of lifelong learning and ubiquitous learning that, that we've all been speaking about. And, you know, online learning is an obvious problem. One thing that is not a problem is faculty. Generally, in the countries I've looked at, the cost of teaching is about 20% of the budget of the university. It is, however, what everybody looks at when they say, well, we've got to use technology to change education. And the relationship between students and faculty and among students is the greatest predictor of all kinds of outcomes we're looking for. So people going after the 20% cost risk destroying what's great about higher ed. The key, I think, in terms of how we want to use technology and the big targets are in everything but the teaching. So when you look at online programs in particular, the core of a great university, that faculty, the students, the intellectual property, everything else is basically about supporting that as inexpensively and well as possible. And the online learning presents a bunch of challenges for traditional universities. They have to market and recruit. They have to do instructional design to take regular courses and bring them online intelligently. They have to support students in multiple time zones, you know, on a strong technology platform that, of course, will include Kaltura. And then they have to place students in a practicum or in a job. And an industry has grown up around that I helped create called online program managers. It's a large industry in the US, it's smaller in other countries. One of the companies I've created since 2U is actually a next generation OPM, online program manager, that I think of more as a network hub. And we've now convened, this is dated, we've now convened over 24 American universities, publics including UVA, U Michigan, U Washington, Pitt, and privates including Howard, Harvard, American, Tulane, some really terrific schools. And the thesis for Noodle Partners and the thesis for this talk is actually that the way you use technology to lower your costs without destroying what's great about each school is collaboration at scale. How do I take that network such that when we add a school to it, everybody benefits? And that is not the thesis in general of higher ed. The starting point is a technology reward scale. The fact is that you put substantial upfront investment into a technology solution, but you have lower marginal costs. And large institutions then benefit from tech. Smaller liberal arts schools and smaller colleges and universities generally don't. Working together, you can get the benefits of that scale. Not every school has to weave together a technology infrastructure, for example. It allows benchmarking. If you want to know, how many support calls do we get about financial aid in September on a per student basis? And is that good or bad? How does that look versus other schools? And And how long does it take us to respond to those and solve the problem versus other schools and versus last year? That the more data you have from more institutions at a micro level, the more schools can hone their approach and actually reduce administrative costs, which are the trickiest. It allows sharing, and I'll take a little exception to Chris. I think actually courses from school to school can be very different, not only across different countries, but even public land grant universities in the US against each other. But if you look at one extreme, which is we're all going to share the same course and we're just going to differentiate on the basis of our campus or our good looks, and on the other extreme, that every single thing a professor does has to be bespoke, the right answer, the third path, are interactive learning objects, not lectures. This is an example of a program we put together for a school that's a simulation in the form of a graphic novel, and you play it out and there's audio and things going on. It's actually a really inexpensive way to build a simulation and really flexible. You can change out panels and audio clips trivially versus convening all the same actors to come back and put on the same clothes and get the same haircut if you want to fix the simulation and it's video based. The object itself, learning objects tend to be expensive and hard to put together, and a virtual reality heart or a good case study or an animation, those are the things that can be shared because they're generally neutral objects, and that large cost can be shared across schools, avoiding schools that you compete with, and all of a sudden you've taken the cost of those objects down to almost nothing. A network facilitates innovation. This is a program we're doing in the US that I think is particularly interesting. We work with, 50 graduate programs. Many of them have agreed that students at good liberal arts colleges can take up to one class per semester for dual credit so that you're on track for graduation at your school, let's say a liberal arts bachelor's, but at the same time, by the time you finish college, you're 40% of the way complete towards your master's. You can get your college degree in May and have your master's by December of that same year, and save a great deal of money in opportunity cost and in tuition. That kind of thing, very hard to do for an individual school, really easy to do as you build a network. We, as I say, work with a couple dozen universities on our way to 50 or 100 universities in the US, but we're looking for universities globally. We're not going to be able to service them necessarily alone, so we're looking for partners in the Middle East, partners in Europe and Asia, and the stronger that global network becomes, I think it will benefit not only the schools we work with, but the students at those schools. And I finished early.
Yep, you did. That was brilliant. Thank you so much, John.
Glad to take some questions now, or just catch up and take questions as a group.
Sure. Okay, so Colin, can you take it from here?
Sure, absolutely. I don't believe John's in New York. Look at that backdrop. There's no way he's New York.
Right. I just wanted to introduce Colin. So Colin is a good friend. He came here.
Sorry, that was actually on my list right now, and I didn't go back to my list. Sorry, Colin. Nicky, please introduce him.
So just to briefly introduce, Colin is the master networker. So John, talking about network, and we can really see, John, how bringing a global network scale can really benefit everyone. And we hope that Israel can be part of that global network. And Michal, it's going to be very interesting to see how we build out new technologies for learning. And Chris, really looking at how we really change models based on assessment and so many of the things you've said. So introducing Colin to sort of, Colin is a master networker, and you'll give your own credentials but Colin's also been hosting a weekly hangout session in this COVID crisis, really introducing large edtech companies that have really excelled during COVID and shown all interesting sides. So I asked Colin to sort of bring out some more jewels and questions for all our speakers.
And
So
just to add to that, I'm going to add to that because now I feel bad. Colin is also the founder at Nex.D, an investor and an advisor. And Nex.D is a dynamic advisory firm that serves clients across the education, deep tech, and media markets within the global economy. So thank you, Colin. Apologies for not doing that before. It's
fine, and don't worry about it. After the illustrious introductions of all the others, I was really worried what you were going to say about me. So that's good that you kind of skipped it. I'm going to say that my 2 claims for fame, actually outside the edtech world, is I actually coached Oxford and Cambridge in the boat race in the UK, which was quite good fun many years ago. But I'm more proud of the fact that last summer I cycled with my 2 children, then aged 11 and 9, basically from the UK all the way to the Lego office in Denmark, which and we got in the local news. So that's much more of a claim to fame than running an edtech company over the world, which is what I've been doing for the last 6 years. So yeah, I'm going to start not with education, but with COVID. Yeah. So like everybody here, we were affected by COVID, the world changed, and we've all had to adapt to that change. And so what we did with Nex.D is we support companies and we help them grow. And so we looked at what was happening with COVID-19 and went, wow, this is really quite fundamental, earth-shattering stuff. So we then did our research, did our due diligence, found a COVID-19 testing company, and then started working on COVID-19 testing. Why does that matter? It means that actually, kind of sadly know that it's not going to get much better very quick. The level of change that you've seen across the world will just continue for quite a continued period, which means this period of disruption for education also continues for quite a continued period, and actually has much far-reaching consequences than we're kind of seeing today. It's not a blip. It's the start of the beginning, not the ending that a lot of governments at the moment are talking about. So over the last few weeks, we've showcased a few companies, some of which started the year with 3 million users and increased by 7 million users in a single month. And it's been really interesting to hear their stories of scale and really interesting to kind of distill some of the key nuggets down, which is what I want to go on to with the speakers. The key theme that came out from all those sessions, 20 odd sessions, is around learner continuity. Yeah, so not so much, maintaining a kind of school-student relationship, but actually that continuity that's going to keep going, not just over this lockdown period, but over the next 2, 3, 4 years. Yeah, where we're not going back to normal, we're kind of heading towards a better normal. So Chris, I loved your 5 kind of the big 5. So let's talk about the educational outcomes that you started unpacking at the end. And let's think a little bit around where does that mean in terms of learner continuity over the next 2 or 3 years?
Trying to understand learning continuity. Can you define learning continuity? Because I'm not sure that I understood what you mean.
Okay, so I think the experience of how will a student, whether let's talk higher education, yeah, how will they continue to learn over the next 2 or 3 years, regardless of whether their university is in sitting or delivering remotely, and how will that learning experience enable them to go into the job market where they may not even get into the physical employment they may even never go into their employer's office, and how will they keep learning those skills as they progress?
All right, so yeah, we would call it multimodal learning, right? Perhaps the question is, what will COVID-19 bring to education, right? And what I'm seeing, I think the biggest advance that is, first of all, crises like COVID-19, they accelerate existing trends. They do not generally create new trends. So what will be accelerated, right? What has been accelerated is our understanding that we need to find ways to deliver the non-learning, the relationship aspects of education across multiple modalities. And perhaps that's what you mean by continuity. We pretty much know how to deliver courses online. What we now need to learn is how to deliver a community experience online better, how to deliver career development better, how to deliver internships better across multiple modalities, and then seamlessly switch between those. And the question of assessments in my mind is across modalities, right? It's a big question. We generally lack good ways of assessing whether a particular way of delivering education. I mean, we have very local assessments, yeah, this leads to 20% higher grades across the same test or 15% higher retention. What we really need to understand is, does a particular program of education lead to someone who's better able to perform at a given job, or somebody who is better able to advance in their career or their life in a 5 to 10 year period? So that's what I'm talking about, assessments. And for that, we need to rethink them much more radically, right? For example, I mean, one of the thoughts I had is, how can we do this, right? And I'm kind of jumping maybe on a tangent here. We need collaboration from industry, right? For example, companies have information about employees once they join them, right? And then, if this information is correlated with their employment and their educational trajectory, we can potentially find patterns that can be much more predictive and informative than any amount of college transcripts and degrees. So I know I did not ask you a question. I answered.
You did. No, that's fine. You did. But I think that chimes on right at the beginning of the session. I mentioned one of the companies that we interviewed was Open Classrooms. So they're teaching 2 million students a month. And part of that is actually bringing mentors from industry into that conversation to make sure they actually deliver current knowledge and skills, to the students. And what they've seen as a trend is so many employers, when they close their offices, they could actually take some of their most experienced workforce and get them training, rather than actually necessarily selling or supporting services within the industry. They actually increased their training effort during the because they weren't attending the normal meetings, they weren't bogged down with the normal system. So John, I just wanted to ask you a quick question. Obviously with Noodle Partners, you bundle together an amazing array of phenomenal services, and then you deploy them towards a university to help that university kind of raise the standard and deliver a product. What have you seen in terms of your data, in terms of which services have kind of skyrocketed and the AWS bill is off the charts, and which services have got barely any traction in this period?
I'll answer your question, but I want to go back also to Chris.
No one wants to answer any questions, but do it anyway.
No, I will. The most disappointing stuff has been the social functionality. The people who've created ways of making online higher ed social have generally missed the mark, haven't fully integrated into the learning management system, haven't tied together synchronous and asynchronous the way I think is critically important, and the social functionality of a campus outside of an individual classroom, but just the campus itself as a community, has yet to be owned by anybody. So that's the least successful. On the most successful side, I would say there are some really good video content management systems. Not video content management, that's Kaltura, which is also very good, but just learning content management systems that are starting to come together to help professors build programs that are build online materials that are professional and smart, the way you might use Wix or Squarespace to build a website. And you're starting to see professors getting more comfortable with tech, but also tech becoming more comfortable with learning. And that's the trend line I'm watching hard. In terms of Chris, your answer, I just want to note on assessment why it's so hard. Anything you can measure in education, whether it's K-12 or higher ed, doesn't matter, right? I can look at grades, I can look at attendance, I can look at all sorts of metrics. They're all short-term things that the only reason we look at them at all is we hope that they predict the long-term outcomes that actually matter. We are correlating none of the short-term metrics with the long-term outcomes. And so it's totally faith-based. And it is legitimately hard, because by the time you have the longitudinal data, 1 year out, 5 years out, 20 years out, the world has changed. And as soon as you say, well, that's clearly the way to do something, everybody says, well, yeah, it was 20 years ago, but it's not now. because everything's different. And so measuring education will never be as simple as measuring the efficacy of a vaccine or just about anything else in society in terms of rapid evolution of a product.
Are you asking me? Yeah, I mean, I think you named one important reason. Yeah, because we really want to correlate short-term changes in technology and process with long-term outcomes. I mean, this brings to mind the Harvard Men study, right? It took it's the only study where we know where a bunch of people were followed for their entire lives, and then psychologists try to distill some of the general principle of what makes for someone to be successful and happy in life. So yeah, I mean, I think, however, that given the amount of data that exists, and going to your point of creating networks, right? If we have a large-scale collaboration of education and industry, right, where everybody was willing to pull the data about the behavior and the performance of people across different metrics, with today's data science capabilities, we can actually make a big advancement. And when it comes, of course, to your point about the world changing, yes, it changes, but at the same time, I like to think about education as having those two levels of skills, the kind of lower level, the foundational competencies, the things like, resilience and curiosity and emotional intelligence, all the things that really are showing to be responsible for long-term success. And then at the top, you have the skills like, learning data science on R and Python and, being able to be conversant on this and that technology, which are changing, right? I mean, yeah, those skills are more transient, but the low-level competencies, they're more lasting. And I mean, to me, increasingly, we learn that that's where the game is, won or lost. So
it is very tricky, though.
Yeah, that's why it hasn't happened. But my point is, as long as we don't fix this, and going to your point about the bloat of education, right? I mean, yeah, the universities spend as much money on posturing, marketing, big stadiums, I mean, buildings that signal quality and prestige. Why? Because there's no better, more reliable way to do it. That's because we are a credence good. Our industry will not fundamentally transform unless, and I know it's a very difficult unless, we figure out a way to more measurable and reliable say that, this innovation and this particular way of learning works better. I mean, I think that's at the heart of why this is such a big shift to move.
So I totally agree on that, and I'm conscious of time. So Michal, just in terms of Kaltura, obviously you made it very clear that Kaltura isn't really an education technology company. It's it's a technology company that is used, educators use it to amplify what they do. What are you seeing in other spheres? What are you seeing Kaltura used for in other areas? Are you seeing any of those get ahead of education? It's quite interesting to look at what's happening in other spaces and see where they're going.
Yeah, so when we started the company, video was mostly at the center of news and entertainment because they had the big cameras, they had the distribution, and just, I guess, social networks and video like YouTube were just at their infancy. And I'd say that education definitely has become one of the industries where video has become mission critical, probably to the greatest extent. But during COVID-19, healthcare has definitely stepped up. So a lot of processes that, a lot of also behaviors that, people were really concerned about actually has shifted during COVID-19. So healthcare has become a massive adopter of video technology. And in a similar way, we're seeing, retail has adopted video. So look, think of a lot of the online experiences where once upon a time you just be seeing images, you now see videos. And there are a lot of areas where you don't even expect to see video. Think of insurance, where, think of how you could potentially capture information and send it to the insurance company, or somebody assessing a case could capture information and share it. So a lot of workflows, video is becoming a very dominant data type and becoming mission critical in many other industries. But I'd say at the center of businesses, I'd say that, probably after education, healthcare is going to become the biggest boom in terms of adopting video, and then perhaps also, you have security that was always there, but healthcare is the one that we're seeing from a demand perspective, the greatest rise in demand right now.
I think particularly on healthcare, and I do always love the we did a lot of work with banks in the last 6 months, and they always said, no Zoom calls, nothing remote. If you want to see us, come to our office. And obviously now that conversation just doesn't happen. Oh yeah, we can work out how to get Zoom working.
Yeah, but also remember that many bank personnel are not necessarily, they're sitting oftentimes in call centers where you don't necessarily want to actually open the video. So, I mean, that's a big challenge that they have perhaps now with virtual backgrounds and, noise cancellation that's starting to exist at a much higher quality. It will become more feasible to actually have call center reps show themselves on video. I'm sure a lot of people never want to show themselves on video to their bank. So, but yeah.
Can I jump in and just ask a very small question to bring all three of what you've been saying about assessment? And Michal, like, what would the future be of video for assessment? Of, a lot of there's a chancellor of New York City spoke about the other day how they're not doing any testing for the semester. They're not expecting any of the 1,800 schools in New York to be doing any testing right now, which changes the assessment model. But I'm wondering how video could be used as a tool for assessing learning outcomes, as opposed to what our traditional methodology.
So a lot of things that have to do with skills, you can actually test over video very easily. So exhibit skills, these are things that actually become possible using video. I have seen quite a few institutions shift to, asking students to turn on cameras while they're taking a remote test. Obviously, it doesn't prevent collaboration through other channels and using other devices and but it is, some way to keep, students honest. So video as more of a guard to discipline, that's one. But I'd say that, a lot of schools, we saw that in Australia early on before COVID-19, there's been a massive shift to actually demanding student assignments over video. So you need to hand in a video assignment, it's authentic. You then are the one presenting it. You can actually also assess not only regular, skills such as, nursing skills and things like that, but also presentation skills. So that's going to be a growing trend for sure.
Thanks.
I'm just conscious of the time, but we're happy to keep going. But I'm just.
Yeah, Colin, this is Israel. It's nice to be conscious of the time, but no one's conscious of the time. So it's really nice that you're conscious of the time, but you can go on.
I'm very jealous of John's bottle of Coke, so.
we can go on for like another 5 or so minutes. And Colin, if you want to, we have a couple of people that want to give pictures, and there's a couple of questions in the chat.
Yeah, no, I saw those in the chat, so that's why I was kind of mindful on that side. On that aspect. I think there's an interesting aspect around. Okay, a lot of universities are focused on the international student, no disrespect for the cash, right? It was a way of filling the coffers. We're going to definitely see a huge amount less international travel, but not necessarily, but tourism, yes, one thing, international students, another. So what do we think will happen to that space? Will those students go, well, actually, I'm fine. I'll just get my education locally in my time zone, for want of a better word. Or do we think that universities will continue to pitch out for the international students? And then there's the real question around how do they price differently for an international student coming in from China to an East Coast university in the US? And how does that work? So yeah, Chris, John, any particular thoughts on that one?
Let me go first. BU has a large percentage of international students, so this question is very much on our mind. So we don't know yet how much of a hit we're going to get, but we know we're going to get a hit. There are many different ways to think about this. Online programs US online programs have generally been taken up by mostly domestic students. We have this actually irony where, let's say, 80% of our residential graduate programs, 80% of the students are international, and 80% of our graduate online programs are domestic, right? I mean, there's no reason why this needs to stay this way, right? There's, of course, a cost differential. That's actually an impediment for international students. I mean, those things are becoming less of an issue with the emergence of low-cost, large-scale degrees, let's say, like the ones that edX and Coursera are pioneering. If these things become a trend, then the cost will basically enter the territory where, I mean, BU has an online MBA, if I can make a pitch, at $24,000, which is a groundbreaking amount, and we have a substantially larger number of applicants international. I mean, we were launching this September, right? Perfect timing. And we have a much larger number of international applicants than in other online programs, as you can probably imagine. So if this trend continues, there's no reason why students from abroad cannot take those degrees. And then the other possibility, which of course there's also a lot of regulatory hurdles for students who are resident in one country to receive degrees from another country. A lot of schools have done a lot of partnerships with local schools where, you know, you get a degree which is kind of underwritten by a local school and an international school. The price point is attractive for the local students, and then there's some sort of revenue sharing happening between the partners. So that's another model that has been seen working. But in the long run, to me, if I want to look at the strategy of the university, honestly, the big market which is opening ahead of us is what I started my remarks with, which is the lifelong learning market. I mean, and essentially that we should be increasingly looking at.
Very much so. Totally agree. John?
Two things. One, it's going to be a while before the international population starts moving again, especially in the US, until we have a different president. No, honestly, you can expect to see continued decline in number of international applicants here. And it's been dramatic. It's probably halved, even pre-COVID. That's been to the benefit of countries that also are exporters of education. And watching schools right now try to navigate a new economic reality where they don't have 10 or 15% of their students coming in from other countries who are paying full tuition, you know, it's a daunting moment. As online education gets better and gets more global, I think you'll expect to see some fierce price competition. And US schools, for instance, are probably overpriced for an international population. So a couple of vectors suggest that this is going to be a rocky game for international students. One other factor I'll just put in there, in the US, which has a fairly evolved online ecosystem, 35% of graduate students, for instance, are online. 65% of those students study within 50 miles of home. So there's a real inclination to say, yeah, it's an online program I can do. I could work with any university, but increasingly, not decreasingly, increasingly, I'd rather do it in a school where the alumni population is around me, where the network that I'm joining is powerful to help me get a job. And so I wouldn't think of education as becoming more international over the next couple of years. I might think of it as becoming more local, even with online.
I think very much so. And I think that your challenge at the moment, and, you know, I talked briefly about Cambridge earlier, UK University. They've just basically said no courses, face-to-face courses in Cambridge until, you know, midsummer next year. So if you started your course in September 2019, start of the year for them, you basically got kicked out in February and you're not back for a year and a bit. Yeah. So much more likely to go for a local university where your rental, you're probably, sadly, still living with your parents. Not good for them, I'm sure. And effectively your lower rent opportunity, go to your local university. Therefore, it's not going to kill you and not kill your price if you're having to go backwards and forwards and therefore the issue. One more question or not?
Last question.
Last question. Okay, let's talk a little bit younger age groups, right? And so Nicky did mention the challenge or the opportunity of educating students at home or educating yourself. And again, so are we going to shift towards a model where effectively to maintain some degree of social distancing or any appropriate measure that, you know, students under the age of, let's draw a line, 12 or 13 will go to a kind of school setting, and schools, children aged at 12 or 13, where they can more easily do things remotely, actually just get educated from home. So quick pop quiz. Do we think we're going to end up in that sort of model? Young people go stay at school, older students basically educated more remotely, or a more remote education is a bigger part of their daily diet. So Chris, what do we think? Do you think we're going to head in that direction?
I think what we will be seeing, basically integrating everything that all three speakers have said, is a bigger agility towards, you know, going across different modes of education. I mean, that's really what I mean. Once we figure out better the social aspects of delivering, you know, education and the relationships and networking and career development online, I mean, students will be able to more nimbly go back and forth different modes. I mean, BU, for example, I mean, you know, our kind of word for the fall is LFA, learn from anywhere. So we will be offering courses simultaneously, residentially, and remotely. Those who can and are willing to come to the campus, they will get the classes, the course in the classroom. Those who are remote, they will get the same experience. I mean, well, not the same experience. They will get the experience remote, right? If this thing continues for another 2 or 3 or 4 years, we'll get much better at that. And in fact, this will have a lot of dividends. It will allow students who perhaps want to start a career at 18 to at the same time have a college education, right? They will allow students who want to spend some time in a different country and have an internship in the other end of the world to have what you said, continuity of learning, right? So I think that's really what one of the things that this crisis is going to benefit is we'll get much nimbler in just crossing those modalities.
Absolutely. Michal, any thoughts on, do you think the kids are going to...
I have my thoughts as a parent, I have my thoughts as a potential instructor, and I have my thoughts as a technologist. I'd say that as a parent...
And then we need to wrap up. I'm really sorry.
Yeah. So I'd say that as a parent, I'm definitely not in favor of increasing screen time for learning. And I think a lot of parents resist that, and they're trying to also find ways to turn it more into a community thing and less of a just online learning thing. My assumption is that if it does transition to be partly online, it will definitely be hybrid, and there'll be ways to keep kids in capsules or, you know, smaller groups. I know that in the UK, it's also the case right now where it's smaller groups at school. But in any event, I don't think it's a positive learning environment to be primarily online.
Okay. So we're gonna wrap it up and just have a couple of 60-second pictures. But Colin, thank you so much. You should be my co-host every time.
Sure, delighted.
You're amazing. We didn't even have a discussion before. I just felt the trust, and yeah, you did an awesome job. Thank you so much, Colin. You're awesome, and thank you so much to Chris. Thank you to John. Thank you to Michal. Thank you to Nicky.